Good morning, everybody.
Buenos días a todos.
This panel today. We're going to have three special panelists on this panel, which is according to the importance of implementing ESG factors in the investment process. My name is Federica Salazar, and Carolina Duque will also join me as panel moderator. So I'm going to present the panelists before they present themselves. We have Marianela Gonzalez, who works as an environmental and social advisor for Norfund, and she's based in the Costa Rica office. Marianela has over 15 years of experience in managing, analyzing, and supervising complex environmental and social issues for multiple sectors, such as renewable energy, tourism, financial institutions, infrastructure, cattle, and agriculture in private companies, development financial institutions, and as a consultant. Hi, Marianela, how are you? Good to have you here.
Hi, Federica. Thank you for the introduction. Happy to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
Thank you. Welcome. Next, we welcome Scott Zdrazil. Scott is a senior investment officer with the LACERA, which is the defined benefit plan for government employees in Los Angeles, California. LACERA manages over $65 billion on behalf of over 170,000 members. At LACERA, Scott is part of the senior investment team and is charged with overseeing all corporate governance initiatives and integration of ESG into the total funds investment process. Hi, Scott. Good to have you here.
Thank you for the invitation to participate in today's discussion. Much appreciated. Pleasure.
And last but not least, we have Mr. Alberto Parodi. Alberto is an investment officer at IDB Invest, which is a multilateral development bank committed to promoting the economic development of its member countries in Latin America and the Caribbean through the private sector. During his career at IDB Invest, Alberto has led the origination, structuring, and execution of investments in private equity and private credit funds across the region. He also has engaged in projects that supported the development of local capital markets and that provided financing to financial intermediaries in multiple countries. As part of his responsibilities, he coordinates with the environmental, social, and governance safeguards, finance, development effectiveness, legal, and risk functions throughout the project structuring and closing of deals. Hi, Alberto. Good to have you here.
Hi, Federica. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here.
Welcome. Thank you. And finally, I'm going to present my co-moderator, Carolina Duque, which is a transactional attorney with over 17 years of experience, 12 of which involved handling legal structuring, drafting, negotiation, and closing of local and international financings and projects. Recently, her practice includes also advisory in sustainable financing and investment. Before joining Baker McKenzie as partner of Banker and Finance, Carolina was a professor at EAFIT and UPB universities, senior associate of an Iberoamerican law firm, like legal director at a Brazilian financial company, and an in-house counsel for financial institutions. Hi, Caro. Good to have you here also.
Hi, how to all? Good to be here. Thank you.
So if you guys want to begin, let's begin with the first question. I believe that, or no, maybe we should begin with your introductions. So each one of you, Alberto, Scott, and Marianela, you have a couple of minutes to introduce yourselves to the rest of the audience. Marianela?
Thank you again, Federica, and thanks for the introduction. I would, as you already gave a few words on me, I would just like to quickly introduce Norfund and explain a little bit on what this this fund is. And Norfund is the Norwegian investment fund for developing countries, and it is owned and funded by the Norwegian government. And it is the government's most important tool for strengthening the private sector in developing countries and for reducing poverty by investing in sustainable businesses and industries. Norfund prioritizes investments in 4 investment areas that are clean energy, financial institutions, what we call scalable enterprises, that it's mostly manufacturing and agribusiness, and green infrastructure. We are focused in 3 regions in which we have local offices, and we also have a headquarters in Oslo, and the regions are Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And we have defined 29 target countries that are the focus of our strategy. In order to fulfill our mandate, we focus in countries, sectors, and instruments where capital is scarce and our development impact is likely to be strong. Hence, these 2 criteria that are additionality and impact constitute the backbone of our strategy. Being additional also means adding non-financial value in the form of expertise and active ownership to the investments we make. Through our value additionality, we improve both the financial profitability and the development impact of the companies. Norfund, and hence and consequently, Norfund is an additional investor because we supply capital and competences that are otherwise scarce or unavailable in a specific markets. We are able to make capital available in our target markets because we are willing to assume more risk, as this is part of our mission. And we're willing to assume more risk than maybe other investors are not willing to assume. And we prioritize projects that have a strong development effects, and this is very important for us. And also we enhance these effects through active ownership, as I said before, and through our business support program. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianela. Scott, your words, please.
Sure. So as you mentioned, Federica, LACERA is the defined benefit plan for government employees here in Los Angeles, California. Our members are over 170,000 who are firefighters, fighting wildfires in California, public defenders and prosecutors in the court system, child social service employees, parks and recreation. It's a very diverse group of folks for whom our core mission and our exclusive purpose is to really invest that $65 billion in assets to produce, protect, and provide the benefits that ensure their retirement security. We have a very diversified portfolio. As long-term investors, we are investing across generations of current and future employees of Los Angeles County. That means we are invested in over 7,000 companies in over 65 markets in the world and across different asset classes from public equity, private equity, infrastructure, fixed income, and so forth. Our approach to ESG, we're eager to talk about today. It is guided by that mission to generate sustainable returns that help us protect and provide those benefits to members. So I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Scott. And Alberto, on to you.
Thank you, Federica. IDB Invest, a member of the Inter-American Development Bank Group, is a multilateral development bank committed to promoting the economic development of its member countries in Latin America and the Caribbean through the private sector. It finances sustainable companies and projects to achieve financial results and maximize economic, social, and environmental development in the region. With a portfolio of 13 billion in assets under management and 385 clients in 25 countries, IDB Invest provides financial solutions and advisory services that meet the needs of our clients in a variety of industries. Talking a little bit more about our sustainability policy, IDB Invest has an environmental and social sustainability policy that establishes the environmental and social commitment and requirements for all transactions supported by IDB Invest. This policy describes the focus for risk management and opportunities. It is underpinned by the IFC performance standards, which is a widely accepted standard in the international finance community, establishing client requirements when receiving financing. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the introduction, and many thanks also to ColCapital for having us here. I am grateful to co-moderate this panel with my excellent and highly appreciated colleague, Federica, to whom I would like to introduce to the audience. Federica is an attorney with a master's degree in environmental law with broad legal and administrative experience in environmental and administrative law and related areas. She is an environmental health and safety law specialist with extensive experience in legal environmental training, legal advice, and representation in businesses in both the public and private sectors. She is a partner in ERM and currently leads the due diligence service for ERM's Latin America region. Her broad experience is composed of support in connection with HSE permitting, obtaining licenses, concessions, and permits needed to begin certain projects or businesses, ongoing compliance with environmental and health and safety regulations and standards, M&A services all over the region, and with the proper management of contamination incidents and or identification of environmental liabilities. So let's get started. And to pose the first question to our panelists, let me highlight a couple of developments regarding ESG and how asset managers are dealing with this concept of sustainability. Back in 2019, 230 investors representing approximately $16 trillion in assets issued a joint statement to communicate their concern for the deforestation and forest fires in Brazil and Bolivia. And they publicly recognize that those events trigger systemic risk to their portfolios and encourage companies, and I'm quoting here, to redouble their efforts and demonstrate clear commitment to eliminating deforestation within their operations and supply chains in order for these companies to enable themselves to act as recipients of investments. We are also facing a new proposed regulation in Europe addressed to credit institutions and investment firms to properly manage ESG risk. And in the UK particularly, there is a regulation to assign responsibilities to the investors regarding ESG factors among their investments. So in this global context, I would like to ask our panelists how ESG factors are being considered in the investment process, and how does the due diligence, monitoring, and tracking process of the funds are being considered? And maybe if Alberto, do you mind to start with this question?
Sure. Thank you, Carolina. Well, as I mentioned before, IDB Invest has the environmental and social sustainability policy that establishes the environmental and social commitment and requirements for all transactions supported by IDB Invest. In this case, for all the investments that we make in funds, IDB Invest conducts an environmental and social due diligence process, which includes, first, obtaining information about the fund's management on the environmental and social risks and impacts, including the assessment of its environmental and social management system. Then, assigning a project categorization based on the environmental and social risk. The next step is assessing the project against the IDB Invest sustainability policy requirements. And finally, we prepare an environmental and social review summary describing the project's key impacts and mitigation measures, as well as the environmental and social action plan, listing the actions required by the client to reach compliance with our policies. As part of the internal approval process, IDB Invest publicly discloses on its website the investment summary, the environmental and social review, and also the environmental and social action plan days prior to the board approval. In addition, the project team negotiates with the fund manager the inclusion of standard environmental and social conditions and specific environmental and social action plans requirements in the let's say in the limited partnership agreement or the side letter. As part of the monitoring and tracking process, IDB Invest has an internal team which is specialized in the environmental and social aspects, who supervises the fund's compliance with the environmental and social requirements, as well as with the environmental and social action plan conditions. This supervision is on a regular basis. The fund manager produces an environmental and social compliance report annually on the status of the Environmental and Social Action Plan. Moreover, IDB Invest applies a sustainable finance scorecard, which is comprised of 3 key dimensions, which includes the environmental and social strategy, the environmental and social risk management, and the green finance. The scorecard measures the maturity level of the fund in these different dimensions and parameters. By measuring across the 3 dimensions, the sustainability scorecard methodology gives an integrated picture of the strategic considerations the fund goes through regarding sustainable finance. As so, the use of sustainable finance scorecard enriches IDB Invest client engagement by taking a more strategic approach to the supervision process, which goes beyond strict environmental and social risk management compliance. This broader view on sustainable finance reflects the fund's own vision of sustainable finance and has shown to be a strong starting point for conversations with the fund manager on the strategic relevance of sustainable finance. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Alberto. It is key the disclosure and the information process in all this tracking process of the ESG factors. So very interesting, the scorecard system that you already have in place. And I would like to turn to LACERA. Scott, what are your thoughts about this question as to the ESG factors in the investment process and the due diligence monitoring and tracking process?
Sure. So our board sets our investment strategy, which is guided by that mission to produce, protect, provide the benefits to our members. The strategy recognizes that ESG factors might impact the risk-return profile of our portfolio holdings and ultimately the long-term fund performance. So for example, bad corporate governance practices, weak internal controls, natural resource scarcity or poor management, as you cited, Carolina, all that might pose investment risks. On the other hand, sometimes ESG is viewed through the lens of risk, but the other side of the coin of risk is opportunity. So companies that better manage their workforces, access diverse talent, perhaps have more productive relations with their regulators. All of that might accrue to our benefit as investors over the long term. So we recognize that which factors matter might vary by industry. It might vary by the geographic exposure of the investment. It might vary by the investment time horizon that we have as an investor. So what we've done at LACERA is try to take a total fund view, recognizing that ESG matters, but asking our external asset managers how they identify ESG factors that might impact their investment returns. And then we score that to assess on a like-for-like basis within the same asset classes, which managers seem to have more robust processes to identify material or financially relevant ESG factors, what resources they're bringing to bear to be able to do that analysis, how transparent asset managers are in providing information and perhaps key performance indicators, and what indication can they provide to us that their ESG approach is fundamentally linked to their ability to generate sustainable financial returns on our behalf as really asset owners and stewards of the capital that's been entrusted to us from our members. So we recognize that ESG is refining and evolving practice. It's more mature in some asset classes than others. So our 5-point scale recognizes that in some areas, there's very little attentiveness to ESG. In other asset classes, it's very advanced with performance, policy, processes very well defined. On a like-for-like basis, we can try to discern which managers are more robust in their processes, compare that alongside other factors such as fees, the actual performance of the mandate, the organizational strength, and use that to inform our investment decisions to hopefully make the best informed decision of which managers are the best stewards of our capital.
No, very clear. And again, the information is a key aspect of the ESG and in general of the investment process. But I would like to highlight, Scott, your comment as to how you are taking care of ESG as an opportunity, not only as a risk. So I agree with that statement. Actually, I'm sure that you are aware that the requirements to finance the ESG and the development sustainable goals in terms of amounts is around $3 billion per year. So it's indeed a good opportunity for all of us. Marianela, would you mind also to let us know your views on this topic, please?
Yes, in Norfund, ESG issues are managed throughout the investment process. It comes triggered by Norfund sustainability policy, and we have allocated specific professionals that have certain expertise on environmental and social issues and also on governance issues. So in that sense, I would like to highlight that in-house capacity is very important for us in order to not only be able to identify environmental, social, or governance risks, but also, like you were saying, to be able to identify these opportunities, but moreover, to be able to bring this additional value to our clients and investees, and to be able to bring that expertise into the companies that we're investing in. Basically, through the investment process, one of the first steps that we do is screening potential investments against our exclusion list that comes from the EDFI, or the European Development Financial Institutions exclusion list. It's a harmonized exclusion list with different sectors or actions in which we cannot invest in. After that, we gather general information on that potential investment or client in order to assess a preliminary environmental and social risk category. And this is very important for us, as this determines the scope of the due diligence and the resources that we're going to need for this assessment. We have developed internal tools that help us do this preliminary environmental and social risk categorization. That helps us along the process, and these tools are targeted for different projects. For example, we have developed a tool specific for funds or for financial institutions or for clean energy projects. So the information that we would be requirement for different types of investments is going to vary, and it's going to be aligned to this type of investments. Once we have defined the scope of the due diligence and we know the resources needed for that, we would obviously do the assessment. And in this sense, it's important to highlight that the higher this preliminary environmental and social risk category is, the higher the risk, the more detailed the due diligence is going to be. Scoping the due diligence is very important for us because it also points in which areas we should be focusing more, or which sectors should we be paying more attention in this process. During the due diligence, we want to assess, like Scott was mentioning, the capacity of the fund managers to manage environmental, social, and risks and governance risks in their fund. That's highly important for us. We need to understand if they have the adequate systems, the adequate capacity. But of course, this needs to be commensurate to the risks that are inherent in their current portfolio or in their proposed pipeline. So we are not going to have the same requirements for all the funds that we're going to be investing in. That's why we do the ENS risk categorization. So for funds that we believe that their inherent risk is lower, we're going to have a different approach than for funds that where we consider that the inherent risk of the portfolio or the pipeline is higher, then the requirements are going to be more stringent. But I think the basic requirements that we have is to have an environmental and social management system and be able to allocate adequate resources to manage and mitigate these risks. Once we finalize the due diligence, as in IFC, we also develop a summary that is presented to our investment committee. In this summary, we include the findings of the due diligence, and if there are any gaps or shortcomings, we propose mitigation measures in order to close these gaps. And these mitigation measures are proposed in the form of an environmental and social action plan. During our investment committees, we have discussions, we have questions from our management team or the management board in order to understand if the assessment was done correctly and if the fund has the willingness to overcome any of these shortcomings. Once the investment committee has made the decision that we can move forward, Then we go through the legal process, in which we include environmental and social clauses in the legal agreements, and this is also in the form of the Environmental and Social Action Plan, which then is monitored through the lifetime of the fund. Depending on the risk category of the fund, we are going to maybe put more resources and more time in funds that are higher risk than in funds that are lower risk. But in general, we require our investees to give us an annual monitoring report on their environmental, social, and governance performance. Thank you.
No, thank you. Very, very useful, the reference to have specific terms and experts to help you assist and assess the ESG factors. I think that it's very useful. Federica, I pass it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Caro. So let's move on to our next topic and question. So in your opinion, our three great panelists, are ESG factors a catalyst for investment performance? What are your thoughts on this? Marianela, let's hear you.
Oh, definitely. They are a catalyst for the investment's performance. And not only that, we also see ESG factors as key to be able to achieve our mission. And we believe that high environmental and social standards add value to projects, and not only to the projects, but also to the local communities, as well as they enhance the business opportunities. In this sense, managing ESG issues helps a project or an institution or a fund to decrease its exposure to overall risk, and also contributes to its long-term financial viability. Integrating ESG factors definitely contributes to the sustainable growth of the business. And I just wanted to give a few examples on how we see this added value. For example, when you integrate ESG factors, you are first of all responding to the new trends. We all see this coming as a new trend. It has already started for several years, and I feel that it's becoming stronger and stronger. It reduces the ESG risks in your portfolio. It's very important because it improves your brand value and reputation. It increases access to market opportunities, and for example, to financial opportunities from international finance institutions or development finance institutions like Norfund, that we pay a lot of attention to these issues. It also has other impacts, like, for example, reducing staff turnover. It can bring cost efficiency in production. One that is very important is that it improves the relationship with your communities and stakeholders. And we have seen so many projects that can go wrong because community relations have not been managed adequately. And this is very, very important. And finally, they help contribute to the long-term financial viability of the project and institution, as I mentioned before. Thanks.
Thank you, Marianela. I totally agree with your thoughts, especially the ones related to the social, the social issues that arise from these topics, and the branding one, because in the past, many years ago, the financial part was very strict, and everybody was, worrying a little bit more about the financial outcomes of the due diligence and so. But now the branding part has become really, really important, because ESG factors given into the investment are, collaborating every day, it's more to the branding part of the industry and of the sector. So thank you very much. Alberto, what are your thoughts on this? Is ESG factors, very, very important from the IDB perspective, or what are your thoughts on this?
Absolutely. It is important to consider that the costs associated with the environmental and social risks has been increasing over the past years. Today, the market is more aware of the potential impact that could stem from this environmental risk, including the climate change. We also see that regulators are moving to identify policies and promote sustainable finance systems in which banks and other financial institutions manage the environmental and social risk factors in order to promote financial stability, reduce credit risk, and increase the capital flows to green, climate-friendly, and inclusive projects and sectors. It is important to highlight that institutional investors are increasingly asking GPs to include environmental and social criteria on their investment thesis. And finally, I think that consumers also have a new appetite for sustainable and innovative products. In my opinion, implementing an environmental and social risk management improves financial and operational performance. We have some numbers that give us information, for example, that portfolio companies with strong ESG scores tend to outperform their benchmark by 175 basis points. It also helps minimizing potential loss and losses. For example, if you implement environmental and social considerations from an early stage in the investment process, it could increase the project's resilience to the effects of the climate change and reduce the risk that could stem from this type of, or the losses that could stem from this type of risks. And as Marianela just mentioned, it also protects the brand value and reputation of a company. Since the good environmental and social performance by companies, it will help a lot boosting their reputation and brand value. We also consider that it maintains a social license to operate, establishing a very good relationship with communities and promoting local benefits will also prevent opposition from these communities, and will also generate a better return on the investment. And finally, I think that helps implementing this type of international best practices and ESG criteria helps attracting resources from sophisticated investors, since this type of, let's say, criteria provides a seal of approval on sustainability that is very, there is a huge demand today in the market, and it could be very valuable for the investment funds. Thank you.
No, thank you, Alberto. And I'm really glad that you brought up the climate change topic, because it is now a must. You know, a couple of years ago, maybe when companies and advisors were looking at ESG factors, climate change was not as strong as it is now. And from my perspective in ERM, we see every day that clients are, you know, the first topic in the ESG list of, you know, due diligence projects or so. Climate change has become one of the very first ones on the list, and has become, you know, a COVID-19 pandemic, and, you know, all of these new aspects have become really, really important. So thank you for bringing this up. I think that we're going to talk a little bit more about this later. Thank you, Alberto. Scott, what are your thoughts on this? I believe that you would agree with your colleagues on the fact that ESG factors are a catalyst in investments, right?
I certainly would agree that ESG can impact financial performance, can be a catalyst for investment performance. Certainly, we've seen as a diversified investor across markets, across companies, across industries, that poor attention to ESG can result in significant value destruction. The BP oil spill and other episodes throughout recent years and decades repeatedly demonstrates that. On the flip side, there's mounting evidence that more diverse corporate boards, for example, more women on corporate boards tends to be correlated with stronger financial results across a number of different metrics. So we think that our mission to produce and protect that member benefit not only guides our consideration of ESG, but really compels us to look at ESG. But I'd caution that we do think it's important to take pragmatic approaches and have a degree of candor and modesty. There are certainly companies with a strong environmental record, or perhaps an environmentally friendly product, that might have a very poor governance profile. So in analyzing ESG risk and opportunity, it is crucial in our view to take a nuanced view that there might be strengths and weaknesses within that mix. And we need to use that information to make the best judgment and consideration of what's in the best interest of our investments at this juncture.
Great, thank you. And great ideas as well regarding governance, because as we talked before the panel, when we were organizing this conversation, we all agreed in that environmental topics are usually, or used to be usually more, the topic that everybody knew about, but not governance. And governance has become, as well as important and as well as, comprehensive. So thank you, Scott. Caro, on to you for next question.
No, thank you. And I think that it's very valuable to have discussed or mentioned before the relevance of the climate change as a reputational risk, because as nowadays we are having this or facing this discussion as to whether climate change is also a financial risk, not only a reputational one. Actually, there is a paper written by Oliver Wyman on this topic. It was published in 2019, pursuant to which it recognizes that climate risk is indeed a financial risk, not only a reputational one. And in 2017, also the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures published a final report dealing with the question, one of the topics that we discussed before, of disclosure of climate-related financial information. So considering these precedents, I would like to ask our panelists about your views on climate change as a risk itself and how to identify and manage climate resilient investments. And before I give you the word, I would like also if you can mention briefly or make a comment on the difference between physical and transition risk. That would also be great. Alberto, would you mind to take the lead on this one?
Sure, Carolina, thank you. Well, we consider climate-related risks are transversal issues. IDB Invest has been a supporter, actually, as you just mentioned, of the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, the TCFD recommendations, and we've been participating since 2019. And we have recently issued our second disclosure as part of our annual report. For our projects, we distinguish between direct and indirect investments. For direct investments, we perform a specific analysis that is a requirement in our sustainability policy and that allows a climate risk assessment methodology, and follows a climate risk assessment methodology, looking at both physical and transition risks. For physical risk, we screen projects for exposure to hazards by means of geographical information system, for example, exposure to hurricanes, flooding, heat waves, etc. We also try to help our clients to adapt to climate change and become more resilient. We also screen projects for transition risks. For projects, for example, with high emissions, we require greenhouse gas quantification and a reduction plan. We also offer advisory products to help our clients decarbonize and reap opportunities related to the low carbon economy. For example, renewables, feasibility studies, among other opportunities that we can offer to our clients. Thank you.
No, thank you, Alberto. And maybe if you can make a quick comment on the difference between the physical and transitional risks, just for the audience to be on the same page. Would you mind to do that?
Sure. We consider physical risk as those risks that are very clear to identify because are things that could happen physically, no? And as I mentioned before, I mean in terms of potential hurricanes, flooding, heat waves. Those are the types of risks where you can, are based on the geographical information that you can get from each of the projects. While the transition risks are more related to the behavior of the customers related to a specific company. You know, let's say that, I don't know, just to mention an example, that people decide that they don't want to continue buying pork meat. it will have some kind of impact on the future, let's say, sales of that specific industry. So the transition risk, those risks that, and as I mentioned, as an example, in terms of high emissions, the greenhouse gas quantification is very important, because we've seen that the market is also, when I mean the market, the final beneficiaries, the consumers, are taking into account all these measurements, and they might change the way that they buy products based on that type of information. So it's important for the companies in our case, in Latin America and the Caribbean, to take into consideration that these type of risks are real, and they can be exposed if they don't take any measurements or mitigation activities in order to reduce this type of exposures.
And as you mentioned, and also as Scott mentioned earlier, the consumer role will be definitive for this trend of ESG, because the consumer will be deciding which products it will prefer over others, and certainly ESG will hopefully make a difference. Scott, going back to you, how does LACERA take care of this climate change risk, and how does it identify and manage climate resilience investments?
I appreciate the question, Carolina. The investment policies at LACERA recognize that climate change can present financial risks as well as opportunity of our portfolio companies, but also the broader economy into which we're investing. And those risks, as you outlined, could be physical. So rising coastal waters, flood zones, extreme cold events like we've experienced recently, in Texas, where freezing temperatures froze and burst pipes, leading to power outages, impacting companies' ability to operate, and a host of other, severe weather episodes. Climate change can also present transition risks, which we see as the impact of local and international federal policies that might try to address climate change and reprice assets in our portfolio as companies try to transition high carbon intensity holdings and business operations to a lower carbon future. So we want to try to, within available data and evolving models and methodologies, recognize where we have concentrated risks, where we might have opportunities, and move our long-term portfolio over the years and decades to come towards that low carbon future. In that sense, we recognize climate change as a systemic risk, and systemic risks require systemic approaches to address. Our approach is four-pronged. We have joined with other global investors to urge global governments to take the actions necessary to implement and adhere to the Paris Agreement. We have also found in our portfolio and analytics that about 50 companies of our portfolio of over 7,000 public companies actually constitute about half of our carbon footprint. So we've joined with other global investors in an initiative called Climate Action 100, representing over $50 trillion in assets, to urge these companies and others to adopt the TCFD reporting, which Alberto mentioned, where companies can identify, assess, disclose their climate risks, that they reduce their carbon emissions, and that they adopt business strategies that align to that Paris Agreement. The third approach is that we ask all of our asset managers how they're assessing, identifying, and managing climate risks. That includes in our real estate portfolio, identifying how managers are assessing physical impacts, but perhaps also positioning the portfolio towards enhanced energy efficiency, which feeds straight to the bottom line of lower utility usage, for example. And lastly, we're trying to take a total portfolio view by which we've initiated analysis across the portfolio to, beyond individual portfolio companies, understand the effects of climate change, either policy change, the transition changes, or physical impacts what that might bear upon for future capital market expectations or areas of increased volatility, so that that analysis can feed into our strategic asset allocation, which we hope to be climate aware. In other words, aware of the risks and opportunities that climate change is imposing on our investment universe currently and in the years to come.
Thank you so much, Scott. And as we are running out of time, I would like to pass it to Marianela, so she has the opportunity also to comment on this. Marianela?
Thank you. Since we're running out of time, I just wanted to quickly mention what's Norfund's climate position, which outlines how the institution assesses and addresses climate change. And the position has 4 main themes that are related to actions and targets. The first one is investing in climate solutions. So basically, Norfund has decided to continue investing in large-scale renewables, to increase investments in greenfield, distributed generation and transmission, and start investing in waste management and water solutions. The second theme, it's integrating climate across investments, kind of what we're doing with ESG factors, but now kind of mainstreaming climate. So we want to map climate risks for all new investments. We have already developed a climate risk tool that is. We built awareness and capacity in our investees to manage climate impacts, reducing financial risk and sizing climate-related business opportunities. We also include climate requirements and action plans in investment terms when appropriate or when needed. And we want to use our role as owners to influence and support companies on climate. The third theme, it's a very logical one, to avoid fossil risk by excluding investments in oil and coal and also investments in gas. And in gas, we have the exception of gas-fired power where it supports an energy transition that it's aligned with the Paris Agreement. And the last one is building climate resilience. Poverty reduction, it's a key enabler of climate resilience. And we enable the adaptation for people and communities by investing in the least developed countries. And also one of our priorities regions for investments is the Sub-Saharan Africa. Thanks.
Thank you, Marianela. Fede, I will pass it to you so we can pose the last question.
Yes, I believe that we had a couple of more questions, but given the time that we have left, I'm going to ask the last one to you, dear panelists. So here it goes. The monitoring and tracking of the ESG factors are seen as a good practice. You all know that. Nevertheless, are they a deal breaker for you nowadays? What is next in this trend? So we already know what ESG is about, but we want to ask you, what is next? What are you seeing in your companies that we have not, yet seen, and that we're going through there? So let's begin with Marianela.
Okay, thanks. I think first of all, for us, ESG factors are not only kind of a good practice, but because of our sustainability policy, we see them as requirements. So it's very important for us that our investees comply with this. As I mentioned earlier, we do not expect that the companies that we're going to invest in or the funds at the beginning of the investment are already compliant with these standards, but we do seek their willingness to improve throughout the years and the willingness and allocating resources to comply with the environmental and social action plan that would be addressing these shortcomings. So for us, that is key and fundamental. For us, it would be a deal breaker not to have this commitment and not to have this allocation of resources. It is not a deal breaker that the fund is not compliant at the beginning, but if we don't reach an agreement on how to overcome the shortcomings, that is a no-go for us for sure. And in regards to the new trends, I was recently reading an article by Refinitiv about ESG investing trends for 2021, and I would like to quickly just mention a few of them, and I'm going to be quick because I know we're running out of time. But one of them says that the S will move to the forefront, and there would be a clear focus on social indicators as investors assess and amplify their influence on creating more sustainable and inclusive societies. Human rights is also becoming an integral part of environmental and social assessments. And I feel that before, the trend was to pay more attention to purely environmental issues, but now the social issues have become more prominent, as we mentioned before, and that is linked to the social license to operating. Also, how the COVID-19 crisis will have a sustained and profound impact on corporate social responsibility practices. We already see that happening, that a lot of the actions related to corporate social responsibility are channeled to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. Another trend is that transparency and ESG integration will become more profound, and data would play a key role. ESG integration would take center stage, and for ESG initiatives to generate value, they would need to be integrated throughout both the enterprise risk management system, but the business strategy. And this is key in order to capture the material risks, but also the opportunities. And finally, new concepts and technologies will emerge and are related to climate change. That is our most critical systematic challenge nowadays, that we were discussing right now. And in that sense, we need to build tools in our investment strategies that are able not only to reflect the climate risk, but to mitigate and adapt to that risk. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianela. Great thoughts. What about Scott? Scott, go ahead.
So Marianela outlined a very comprehensive view of a lot of considerations that we have to weigh as thoughtful and hopefully forward-thinking investors. Here at LACERA, we assess asset managers in part on ESG, but also at a number of other factors, including their fees, the performance, the organizational quality. We think it's important to take a holistic view of all the risks that Marianela just outlined, as well as other attributes of organizational strength that each component, it informs our decisions of whether or not to increase in investment, decrease in allocation, or perhaps avoid it. So ESG is absolutely front and center in all of our considerations. We also have other attributes front and center, including, how widely do asset managers cast a net for the best talent to manage our capital? Do they include folks of diverse backgrounds in an inclusive, equitable manner? So we think that ESG is going to continue to be a prominent consideration. We want to take a holistic and thoughtful view that hopefully best serves our members and accrues to the bottom line of our fund performance. So thank you.
No, thank you, Scott. Great thoughts as well. Finally, Alberto.
Thank you. Well, in our case, let's say the environmental and social requirements are also mandatory because are part of our policy, what we call policy requirements, since its purpose is to convey IDB Invest commitment to sustainable development as well as its development mandate. IDB Invest believes that the environmental and social sustainability of the activities it supports is central to achieving positive development outcomes. That's why we also believe that the avoidance, minimization, and management of the environmental, social, and health and safety risks and impact is not only sound business practice, but when it is, let's say, implemented correctly, can reduce waste, improve profitability, and generate goodwill and also positive benefits in the communities where the business operates. As a final idea, I will say that the numbers suggest that the ESG factors are here to stay. And it is not only because the multilateral development banks or some investors promote it, but also there is a growing investor demand for investments through an ESG lens. And we believe that the trend will continue for many years to come. And we encourage fund managers to continue incorporating these concepts as part of their due diligence, monitoring, and tracking processes and investment decision. Thank you.
No, thank you, Alberto. It is crystal clear to me that ESG is a must, and it's only going to grow within the following years. I think that the pandemic showed us it's very important to take care of the sustainable issues, and it's in everybody's interest. So I agree with you that they are going to stay and probably to be stronger every time. So we have come to an end. I would like to especially thanks to our panelists, Mariana, Scott, and Alberto, for your time and kindness to share with this audience your experiences, your knowledge in sustainable investments. It is of no doubt high value, and I am sure that all of us have learned a lot from this conversation. Also, thank you so much to Federica for her excellent performance. And last but not least, thank you to ColCapital for organizing this panel and for taking care and leadership in Colombia of such an important topic. It was a pleasure to be with all of you, and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Alberto. Thank you, Marianela. Thank you, Caro.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.